unsurprisingly, as a Nintendo YouTuber, I have been overthinking a lot lately about this topic, and I want to talk to y'all about it today. So Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are the most recent example of Nintendo putting out an amazing game and then following up to it within a relatively quick time frame to give it a sequel. And a lot of people have said the same thing about Super Mario Odyssey, and I've seen a lot of complaints about how Super Mario Odyssey never got a sequel. But then that made me think about all of the other people who had been saying, oh, of course they wouldn't do it. It always cannibalizes sales to do sequels. So today, I am going to look into it and let y'all know if that's actually true. Is it true? Do sequels actually cannibalize the sales of the original? And do they even sell as well as the original? Are they worth making from a business perspective? So the first piece of data that I looked at for this was Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Breath of the Wild sold 31.85 million at this point, and Tears of the Kingdom then sold 20.61 million. So the thing is that yes, Tears of the Kingdom has sold less than Breath of the Wild, but both have been incredibly successful. And of course Nintendo isn't regretting making Tears of the Kingdom just because it's about 10 plus million short of Breath of the Wild's success. But it technically is true that Tears of the Kingdom has sold a lot less than Breath of the Wild has. Even if both were wildly successful, that statistic still remains the same. So let's look at some other games and see if it's still true. How about Ocarina of Time versus Majora's Mask? Well, on the N64, Majora's Mask sold about 3.3 million copies. And Majora's Mask is a cult classic. Everybody loves that game. It's one of people's favorite Zelda games of all time. And yet, it only sold about 4 million less than Ocarina of Time's 7.6 million copies, adding more fuel to the fire that sequels are not as profitable as the original. How about Mario Galaxy versus Mario Galaxy 2? Well, Mario Galaxy 1 sold 12.8 million units, and Mario Galaxy 2 then sold 6.15 million units. So again, we have another case of Nintendo IPs, big Nintendo IPs at that are actually selling half as well as their original counterpart. Does this mean that Nintendo should stop making sequels altogether? Does it actually mean that sequels cannibalize the original sales? Well, to do that, let's look at the Splatoon series. Splatoon 2 had sold about 12 million units before Splatoon 3 hit the scene in September of 2022. Splatoon 2 now sits at 13.6 million copies, and within just a couple of years, Splatoon 3 is already at 12 million copies. In terms of cannibalization, Splatoon 3 absolutely halted the sales numbers of Splatoon 2. But is that necessarily a bad thing? In my opinion, I don't think so. The Splatoon team was going to be working on new content anyways, whether or not they were going to put that into Splatoon 2 or make another game. And another game is entirely more profitable than adding DLC to Splatoon 2 would have been. And of course, they had done continuous updates to Splatoon 2 and added Octo Expansion as a part of DLC, so they made a great chunk of change just on Splatoon 2 alone before moving over to Splatoon 3, which upgraded its visuals, playstyles, weapons, maps, everything. We got an entirely new experience with tons of new ideas from the development team that wanted to do it, and the game is sitting at about 12 million copies as we speak. So, it was a good idea for them to do a sequel in that case. But does that have anything to do with the fact that it's a multiplayer game? I've already talked a little bit about the major Nintendo IPs that had single-player sequels, so I'm actually going to take a little bit of a page out of Sony's book here and look to their first-party solo-player games. How about God of War? Well, on the PS4, the first God of War sold 23 million units as of November of 2022. And God of War Ragnarok, the direct sequel to that, is sitting about 15 million copies, which of course is 8 million less than the original, once again pointing to sequels selling less games than the original. How about The Last of Us? The first game sold about 30 million copies, and Last of Us 2 only sold about 10 million copies. Yet another example of these games selling less than their original counterpart. So now that we've established that sequels pretty much definitively always sell worse than their original game, why would a company ever want to make a sequel to that game? There are actually a couple different answers that I can think of to this question. The first one being simply just story continuity. Some companies will go into it with the mindset of, I want to tell a grand story and I'm going to have to space it out between several different games to tell the entirety of it. Almost like the Marvel effect, where everybody would show up to the theaters to watch every single movie back in the day because of how important each one was to the overall arching story. Another reason that I think that a lot of companies will do sequels is that they see the success of the original and they go, man, people really like that, let's just do it again to try to make some more money. And of course, a lot of people who bought the first game aren't going to always double dip in terms of whether or not they pick up the sequel because they didn't like the original game or they wanted something different from it and they don't like how the sequel looks in comparison to the first game. There are a lot of reasons that someone may or may not like to buy their sequel. Now here's the interesting wrench that's going to be thrown into this. It's actually the Luigi's Mansion series. The first Luigi's Mansion launched on the GameCube in 2001 and sold 3.33 million copies. Then, 12 years later in 2013, Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon or 2 released and sold 6.4 million copies, doubling the sales of the original. Then, 6 years later, Luigi's Mansion 3 released on the Nintendo Switch, selling over 14 million copies, doubling the sales of the sales numbers that had doubled the sales of the original. The series has only grown with each installment. So then what are we supposed to do with this information? How does this tell us what our sequels do and don't do in terms of sales numbers? Well, I think that there is a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why these sequels have sold more than the previous sequels that we had talked about. The first is just overall install base. The GameCube didn't have as many people buying it and playing games on it as the 3DS did, and the 3DS didn't have as many people buying and playing games actively as the Switch has. Not only that, each game in this series has gotten pretty much better in at least some appealable way. The first game was very, very good, and it was a cult classic and everybody loved it. Dark Moon or 2 was very controversial, but still sold 6 million copies, and a lot of people did like the mission-based format because of how portable the console was, and the graphics obviously looked way nicer than the original. Sure, it was a totally different style than most people had been used to with the first game, but undeniably the graphics looked a lot better than the first game. Whether or not you vibe with the style is a matter of opinion. Then Luigi's Mansion 3 combined the very best parts of both games in terms of amazing graphics and amazing gameplay, taking back all of the old things that people hated about the second game and bringing back all of the amazing things people loved about the first game and expounding upon all of it, making everything a little bit more in-depth, making everything better, and marketing the heck out of it. I remember 2019 was full of Luigi's Mansion 3 hype. It was such a great time for the series. What I think this says more than anything is that people are just drawn to quality. They are drawn to good games, and no matter what form they take. Because people don't look if a game is a sequel if they're going to buy it. They don't see the 3 or the 4 in a title and go, nope, I'm good. Metroid Prime 4 will probably sell better than any Metroid game ever, and that's definitely going to be a direct sequel to Metroid Prime 3. I had never played Luigi's Mansion 1, but I picked up Dark Moon when it came out because it looked exciting. I'm sure a ton of people hadn't played Mario Kart before, but they picked up Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. That game sold 60 million copies. So the thing is that it doesn't matter if a game is a sequel or not in terms of whether or not people will buy it. They're going to buy what looks good to them. But that doesn't mean that we can use this as bait and say, well, if a game doesn't sell better than the original, that must mean it wasn't better than the original game. Sometimes all it takes is just the perfect storm for a game to sell as well as it does. I use this example a lot, so sorry if you've watched a lot of my videos, but Animal Crossing New Horizons is an amazing game. And yet I don't think a lot of people in the Animal Crossing community would consider it the best in the series. Yet it has outsold every other game combined in the entire Animal Crossing franchise. That doesn't mean that it's less quality or higher quality than any of the other games, it just means that more people bought it. And a lot of people bought it because the game came out right when COVID started, and it was such a huge phenomenon, and it was cozy and comfortable, and everyone wanted cozy and comfortable at that time. I have presented a lot of different topics and stats that have a lot of different nuances, and you might be wondering why it is that I've done that. Here's my point, y'all. We can't be making generalizations about games and sequels and sales numbers and what it means in terms of enjoyability and how good a game actually is. It's not right to say Tears of the Kingdom is an objectively bad game just because it's a sequel to Breath of the Wild or just because it hasn't even sold close to its sales numbers yet. Another counter argument to that is a lot of people think that Mario Galaxy 2 is way better than Galaxy 1, and that is not true in terms of the sales numbers because Mario Galaxy 1 sold twice as many as Galaxy 2. So it doesn't matter how much a game sells. It doesn't matter what everybody thinks about something. All that matters is how you feel about that individual game. But it doesn't mean that you can take your opinions and your thoughts on a game and push them on to everybody else and push your opinions and become that annoying person no one wants to see on Twitter. Sequels do not necessarily always cannibalize the sales of the original game, nor do sequels always sell less than their original counterpart. Sequels are games that are made because companies feel that there is demand for that product and that franchise. You don't have to tell someone how to feel about a game for you to continue to enjoy it that same way. If that is the case in your opinion, if you think you have to go up to bat for some specific game or series or sequel in order for you to feel happy about that game, then that's something you need to look inward to. And with that, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe if you did, and look out for more content coming up here in the future. Please leave a comment letting me know all your thoughts about today's video and this topic and just anything you want to talk about. My recent video on Donkey Kong experiencing somewhat of a drought here recently has gotten a lot of criticism in the comment section, so I would appreciate if y'all go over there and watch that and give your opinions on that as well. I hope y'all have a great day. My name is Ray. This has been Ray's Nintendo Talk, and I will see y'all in the next video.